in the imaging, so one of the things you mentioned is the use of AI as a tool for providers in interpreting or going through imaging. Is that the same? I'm just not educated on that topic, but I've heard a lot about this. Is that the same type of large language models that are being used for ChatGPT that's being used for provider assisted looking at different imaging or the like?
So it's not,
or are we just broadly calling it LAI?
So we're calling all of it AI, and then for the sake of and in that sense, we're incorrect, right?
Yeah.
Because large language models and so much of the things that we call AI are really not AI, right? They just seem sophisticated to us because, ooh, you took something complicated and made it simple. So, oh, it must be AI or it must be happening in the black box. So there is a lot of nuance to what is truly machine learning and all of those kinds of things. So what I will say is, conceptually, at its core, what they have in common is things like odds are this dot right here more than likely represents something benign, right? Is what, you know, if it's looking, let's say, at a CAT scan, right? To say this dot is something that we need to look for, where sometimes that dot in the midst of other grayness is so small that even the radiologist might not have tuned into that particular thing just because it might be so small, or the difference between normal and abnormal is really, really subtle. Those are the ways where it's kind of augmented, right? So in the healthcare space, I would say there's a lot more augmentation. Right?
Yeah. What I was seeing, like it towards the end of my undergraduate degree at a lot of these conferences and the like, when they were talking about AI in the health space, it seemed like what they were really excited about was less large language models and more machine learning capabilities. So the example we saw was the ability to take footage from what I believe was a colonoscopy and then review, which would otherwise be like your intestines are and your whole system is, it's quite a lot of footage to look through and have people sit there, and mistakes could be made. But because you could train on a single set of a set of data where somebody has gone in and identified, okay, here's what the polyps are and here's what they look like, you could then train and do machine learning for what we'll broadly call AI to go through new video footage and be like, okay, here's where we're identifying issues and targeting those.
So while that is true, there is absolutely a lot of excitement in the large language space because we're talking about documentation, right? So being able to have providers, document their notes because the AI is listening and it can make, very detailed notes. It is also being used in some of the spaces for prior authorizations to read through the language and determine if the criteria is being met or not being met. Are certain keywords there as it relates to things like value-based care or risk adjustment? So there are a lot of spaces where the large language model in particular is really exciting. As fundamentally a primary care provider, as a family medicine doc, the documentation stuff is tremendous to outpatient and primary care providers because, so much of your time, unfortunately, is spent documenting instead of on care. So the big win potentially in that space is we can stop typing on our computers, right, and start looking back at you so that then you can have our eyes and our ears instead of just our ears, which does so much more for the, patient-provider engagement, interaction. You can pick up on some of those subtle body language cues that you won't be able to see if I'm looking at the keyboard. So there's a lot in both spaces.